Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 20th of July, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today via video link is David Scott. Welcome to the programme, David.
I'm very glad to be here. It's good to be back.
This looks like a new background.
Yes, I've moved. I'm in an area of rural Perthshire now, and it's very magnificent.
Good stuff. Well, we had hoped that Brian would join us as well, but technical problems have prevented that, unfortunately. So this might be a little bit shorter news than usual. But we're going to start off with this. I don't know if you saw this story, David, the use of children for intelligence gathering by the police in the UK. And this has come up because of a piece of secondary legislation, a statutory instrument, which has been presented to the, which has been noticed by the House of Lords Committee, which reviews these things. So the original piece of legislation comes under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, but it's a piece of secondary legislation from the year 2000, which defines how British police can use what are described as covert human intelligence sources during an investigation. Well, as we can see on screen here, an authorization for the conduct or use of a source may not be granted or renewed in any case where the source is under the age of 18 at the time at the time of the grant or renewal, unless the person granting or renewing the authorization knows whether the relationship to which the conduct or use would relate is between the source and a relative, guardian, or person who has for the time being assumed responsibility for the source's welfare. So in other words, you cannot use somebody under the age of 18 for this type of work if they would be spying on a parent or a guardian. And the other point that it makes here is the main point under contention. In relation to an authorization for the conduct of the use of a source who is under the age of 18 at the time the authorization is granted or renewed, the maximum time that they're allowed to be used is 1 month, whereas the main legislation says 12 months. That's for somebody over the age of 18. Well, there's an effort now to amend this statutory instrument with this one, and it basically says that instead of 1 month, we need to substitute 4 months. Now, the House of Lords Committee, which is looking at this, was a little bit surprised that children under the age of 18, and particularly children under the age of 16, are being used for this at all. And so they were asking some questions. For example, how many children are involved in this sort of thing? And well, the Home Office Minister, Ben Wallace, was asked, and he said, well, basically, how would he know? Nobody knows. And really, David, this is quite common, this issue of children. If we've got children missing from care, how many children go missing from care? We don't really know. If we've got children in sexual exploitation, how many children are in sexual exploitation? We don't really know. It seems that when children are involved in anything, the government suddenly doesn't, and the agencies don't seem to care too much about how many children are involved. So anyway, this is the report issued by the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee of the House of Lords. It covers 2 amendments: the Draft Investigatory Powers Codes of Practice and Miscellaneous Amendments Order 2018, and the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Juveniles Amendment Order 2018. And they're saying these are serious violent crimes that the children are involved in giving information to the police about. And we have grave concerns about any child being exposed to such an environment. The Minister was unable to give any information on the number of juveniles so authorised, a fact we find surprising given the ongoing review he mentions. So, David, what are your thoughts?
Well, my first thought is consent. Who gives consent for this? Because the child, by definition, is below the age of consent, so can't give legal consent, can't enter into any contracts. That's correct, is it not? So, does the guardian give consent for this, or is consent kind of assumed or manufactured? I'm unclear how anyone could or would consent to to such. I mean, how would you ask a child to weigh up the dangers that they're going to be exposed to, aged, let's say, 15, 14, something like that, in spying on a jihadi or a drug gang? That seems to be asking a lot of a 14-year-old, where in every other form of life the government is constantly infantilizing people and extending childhood. Well, here are we asking the child to make these life and death decisions?
Well, apparently so, and perhaps even an even more concerning thought would be the possibility that in fact it's being sold to children as almost James Bond in its excitement potential. So it's being sold to them in a way where actual consent, informed consent, simply isn't possible. I don't know if that's happening, but I suspect it probably is.
Well, on the basis that if you can think of it, they're doing it. The opportunity for essentially grooming a child to provide the investigatory authorities with what they want, even if that's not in the best interest of the child, seems to be vast. It's astounding, very concerning.
Yes, well, we'll just mention this in passing because Ben Wallace yesterday tweeted out, I think it was yesterday, tweeted out about the Associated Press story which claimed that the UK authorities had identified Russians that were involved in the so-called Novichok poisoning. Ben Wallace said, "I think this story belongs in the ill-informed and wild speculation folder." So he may not care too much about how many children are involved in various things, but he's at least relatively on the ball with this one. But look, let's stick with the children's issue, David, and the named person scheme. And the headline here is, "You lost, UK's top judge slaps down SNP on state snoopers."
Yes, the travails of the SNP go on. You may remember that after their crushing defeat in the UK Supreme Court, John Swinney went on and said that the attempt had failed and that the government was in fact victorious. Well, it wasn't. They had to pay all the court costs of both sides. That was a clue. And here's the judge who led that inquiry coming out quite clearly and saying it was a very important case and a landmark case. And yes, they did indeed lose. And let us remember, if I can find it quickly, what was in the findings. I'll have to go from memory. The first thing a totalitarian government does is to go after the children, because if they can separate the children from the diverse influences of their family, they can take control. That's not quite word for word, but that was the gist.
And that was from the president of the UK Supreme Court.
That was from the findings. That was from the actual finding itself of the UK Supreme Court.
Okay, but what we have on screen here is President of UK Supreme Court insists named person legal victory was most important.
Yes, and she points out that the decision was it was incompatible with the right to respect for private and family life, and that was the key finding. And that was a very substantive and important finding, not the way the Scottish Government are constantly trying to paint it.
And also from the No to Name Person website, further embarrassment is government panel unable to hit code of practice deadline.
Yes, you've got to feel sorry for Professor Ian Welsh, the chair of the Getting It Right for Every Child Practice Development Panel, because he has been asked to harmonise the named person and GERFEC legislation, which essentially requires full spectrum panopticon-like state surveillance of family life for every family, so that the state can intervene before anything goes wrong, because they have the gift of foresight as well, and they'll gather all these little bits of data, and from all these bits of data they'll see when something's going wrong, and they'll intervene and sort the problem before it gets expensive. That's the scheme, and he's got to harmonise that with GDPR, and you know, Mike, it's taking a little while.
Well, I'm sure it is. Now, of course, right at the heart of this whole getting it right for every child policy is the idea of the role of parents, and that parents also have a role in bringing up children. So we want to highlight this little video clip from the Scottish Government, and we'll talk about this once we've watched it. Here we go.
This could be the first time that they've actually had a parent look after them and, you know, show them affection and love in their entire life.
Corporate parenting is important to me because in a place when I don't have access to the same opportunities as everyone else and don't have parents around me to support me, it's important that the state steps up and looks after me and takes an active role in my life.
It can literally be the thing that changes a young person's life. It's the first time that we've had someone of the state genuinely give care towards us and wanting to see us progressing and flourish and grow, and I think it's a great initiative, and more needs to be done for it.
It's basically acting like parents in our corporate sectors, and I think really in society I think we need to remove that label corporate and just have it parents.
It can be the one thing that can really inspire young people to do the best that they can, and I think corporate parents have an incredible job and they've got such an opportunity to make a difference in these young people's lives.
So none of those lines were learned at all, David, and well, we've just got to remove the word corporate from the term corporate parent and just have parents, because you know, the state is perfectly capable of fulfilling that role, no?
Well, we know the state is the world's worst parent. There's many things about that little video that were very concerning. On the political level, the First Minister hugging the child as the voiceover talks about the first time they've received love is North Korean in its subtlety.
I was thinking Pol Pot Cambodia there.
Well, yes, all of these. This is the national mother figure. That's what's being put forward, the mother of the nation. That's the not too subtle reference here. And then we get on to, I mean, the most concerning thing is these are young people who have been let down very badly in their lives already. And what I see here is them being lied to and manipulated. They talk about love, right? This is the first time some of these people will be given genuine love by the state, right? And they've been told this is true. And because they're young and they want this to be true, they're prepared to believe it. And finding out otherwise is going to be a very painful experience. There is a document that goes with this, a guide to corporate parenting. Now, a couple of quotes from this. At one point they say, in other words, corporate parenting is about certain organizations, so it's organizations, not people, listening to the needs, fears and wishes of children and young people and being proactive and determined in their collective efforts to meet them. That's not parenting. That is not the definition of parenting. That's not what you're doing. When they define corporate parenting, they say an organization's performance of actions necessary to uphold the rights and safeguard the well-being, remember well-being is never defined, of a looked after child or care leaver, and through which physical, emotional, so how can an organization give emotional support? I'm not clear on that. Spiritual, social and educational development is promoted. Now, who's making these decisions? Is a child making these decisions? Because a child can't make these decisions because a child's a child. So the organization is going to make decisions. Well, what are the decisions? What emotional and spiritual development is that going to be promoting? Who decides this? There are just many questions here. And the other thing is, remember, if you want something done badly, get it done by lots of people, right? So the organisations that have this corporate parenting role for one child are the following: the Scottish Ministers, Children's Hearing Scotland, Post-16 Education Body, National Convener of Children's Hearing Scotland, the Scottish Social Services Council, Healthcare Improvement Scotland, Scottish Legal Aid Board, the local authority, the principal reporter, the National Health Service, the Commissioner for Children and Young People, the Sports Council. That's about half of them. and on it goes.
So these children are going to have an unbelievable number of parents then?
Yes. So every organisation that they interact with in the state will have this parenting role. So it's not love.
Sorry, David, hold on a second. What happens to the relationship between an individual and the state if they're brought up in this way?
I have no idea.
Once they're adults,
yes. How do you ever break free of that?
Well, look, this is an interesting point. But if we go back to this graphic here and the quote, for the purposes of the guidance, the term corporate parenting is defined as, and they're talking about the well-being of a looked-after child or a care leaver. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but a care leaver is somebody who's finished their care. So that's somebody over the age of what, 18?
Yes, it goes on to 26.
So we're actually talking about the state being the corporate parent of an individual until they're 26?
Yes. If you've been associated with a care system at all, that applies. Oh, and see the cover of that, you'll notice that it's two men holding the children's hands, not a man and a woman. That's almost standard in Scottish government publications. They never show a standard family.
Okay, thanks, David. Now let's go on to the People's Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, the Fresh Start Foundation. What's the latest on this?
We're having our next roadshow. This is our Broth. It's on Saturday, 11 till 3, and it's in the Meadowbank Inn. So hopefully people can come along there, force yourself away from the Carnoustie Golf for a little while, come along and see us and find out how you can join the fight to protect children and to change the society so that we create a society where we have millions of people who understand how abuse works, understand signs, and are looking out for one another in simple, personal ways every day and in every part of our country.
Okay, good. Now let's move on to international news. And David, actually not quite, but international news, because of course you in Scotland had the pleasure of Donald Trump's visit last week, and he went and played some golf, I believe.
I think he had a lovely time. The protesters got very agitated, as they did in London, and the press got very agitated. The left-wing kind of establishment media in Scotland were apoplectic. So they showed, Nicola Sturgeon obviously wasn't invited to see Donald. So she got herself made Grand Marshal of the Glasgow Pride Parade. So she walked through Glasgow with a T-shirt with love in rainbow colours imprinted on it. And the local press here had this and a shot of Donald playing golf. And their headline was Pride and Prejudice, which was very quirky. But it did occur to me which was which, because if you went along to that Pride Parade, as we'll see later here, and you put forward a view that did not agree with their political worldview, you would see extreme prejudice. And I would say that if whatever else was on display with Donald Trump, he did show pride in his country. So I would question which way round the Pride and Prejudice actually works.
Well, of course, he did leave Prestwick Airport in Air Force One and head over to Helsinki for the meeting with Vladimir Putin. He's now come out and said that he would quite like Vladimir Putin to come and visit him in the White House. And this has instilled a whole new flurry of problems. So here we go. This is Sarah Sanders, the spokesperson, saying in Helsinki, the president agreed an ongoing working level dialogue between two Security Council staffs. President Trump has asked Bolton to invite President Putin to Washington in the autumn, and those discussions are already underway. And Trump himself said the summit with Russia was a great success, except the real enemy of the people, the fake news media. I look forward to our second meeting so that we can start implementing some of the many things discussed, including stopping terrorism, security for Israel, nuclear weapons, and so on. But this has caused the usual hysteria, shall we say, amongst the usual suspects. I saw Edward Lucas this morning tweeting out all kinds of angst about this. So things just go from bad to worse for the globalists here.
Yes, it's called TDS, Trump Derangement Syndrome, and there's a lot of it about.
Okay. Okay, right. Now, let's move on to Israel, David, and this. You've got a tweet here from Jews versus Israel. A photograph, tens of thousands of Orthodox Jews are now gathering in the city of Bnei Brak at the historic mass prayer event. What's going on?
Well, this is a protest. This is a mass protest against the draft into the IDF. Now, the principle has been up until now that if you are in an Orthodox community and you join a yeshiva, which is a religious college, to study the Talmud principally, then you are exempt from serving in the IDF. And this has not been entirely well received by the rest of Israeli society. They pray for us, we bleed for them would be a typical phrase from maybe a decade or two ago when Israel was involved in major wars, but obviously the Orthodox were not. So there is this internal pressure to end this exclusion and to make the country more united. There's always this unifying, we want to be one approach in any state, and it's there too. So this is being viewed with great hostility by the Orthodox, who are growing in numbers and growing in political power and voting power all of the time. The Orthodox community is very separate in Israel, lives very separate lives, and with an average number of children, I think currently sitting at 9 per woman, there is quite a large increase in population as well. So you have an increasing power block, and they're flexing their muscles, and they don't want to be subject to the draft. But that seems to be coming. So this is part of the protest movement against it.
Okay.
And it's part of a wider series of things which I want to talk about today, which is the schisms within Israel and within the Jewish world. And you'll often find people talking about the Jews as though there's a monolithic block, and that's extremely far from the truth. And it's important to understand the nature of the divisions and what's given rise to them, and the effects that this will have on international politics.
Sorry, David, just looking at this Times of Israel article here, ultra-Orthodox stage huge anti-draft protest. I mean, the numbers they're talking about are literally huge. 300,000 people. It's not often you would see a protest of that scale in this country, for example. And bearing in mind the population of Israel is significantly smaller than Britain, that's quite.
Yeah, that's 300,000 out of a population of 6 million. Yeah, that's phenomenal. And they were claiming they would get 1 million. So that gives you an idea of just the sort of size of the community. And so you're talking people who will vote in the bloc and think in similar ways. So it will have a big effect. And also the lifestyle they lead produces a lot of friction with the more secular parts of Jewish society. So if you take that into a country, if you can see maybe some of the complaints that you see in maybe Luton with the Islamic traditionalist Islamic community there, having a lot of friction with the more secular British community. You're seeing similar sorts of things in parts of Israel with the ultra-Orthodox.
So in these two articles, well, are these both from Haaretz? It says head
yes.
Yes, right. So on the left here, it says head of conservative Judaism movement compares Israel's religious authorities to Iran and Saudi Arabia. And on the right-hand side, it says Israel's ultra-Orthodox establishment is consolidating its power. So this is clearly developing into quite a schism.
It is. Now, the first article here, this is a rabbi in America, Rabbi Stephen Wernick. Now, he's complaining bitterly and with some justification. The police arrested and questioned a rabbi in Haifa. Now, his crime was he conducted a non-Orthodox wedding without the approval of the chief rabbinate. And here you get an insight into the nature of the political aspects of Judaism as a religion, because you have a lot of things: marriage, divorce, and conversion. And remember, if you're Jewish, you have a right to live in Israel. So conversion is access to citizenship as well. It's all controlled by the rabbinate. It's controlled by the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox, and they're seeking to exclude more moderate strands of Judaism, the conservative and reform, from being allowed to conduct anything official. So they're trying to exclude them. And here you see the police were actually involved and arrested this guy in order to pull him out of bed in the middle of the night in order to question him about conducting a wedding. Very remarkable. And he talks about the risk of theocracy in Israel. And he says it's not just hyperbole. And we should remember that. The second article is it's talking about a couple of things. It mentions the conversion law again. There's an attempt to reduce the monopoly that the Orthodox have on conversion into the Jewish faith, because a lot of the Russian Jews who came across and settled in Israel and are citizens and are living there are officially no religion, because they refuse to go through the expensive and somewhat humiliating process of becoming converted to Judaism. So they are kind of excluded officially from any sort of religious affiliation. So there's some debate about that, but the Orthodox are saying, one conversion for one people. Always watch when you see people talking about one. One's a bad sign. One, we're looking for this unity. We see this frequently, but it doesn't usually end well. And then he goes on to talk about the nation-state law. Now, this is really quite remarkable, and it's worth just going over what the items are. The new nation-state law, which is going through the Knesset just now, says Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people who have the unique right of national self-determination. Not sure about the word unique, but there we go. The flag and the menorah are national symbols. National anthem is a Havitka. Jerusalem is the united capital of Israel. So the Jerusalem question has been built in by law as being off the table. The official language is Hebrew. Arabic has special status. Now, Arabic used to be a joint official language. Apparently no more. Israel will be open to Jewish aliyah, the emigration inwards. Israel will work in the diaspora to preserve the affinity between Israel and the Jewish people. That affinity is breaking down quite heavily, actually. Israel will ensure the safety of Jewish people and work to preserve the cultural, historical, religious heritage of the Jews of the diaspora. The state places national value on the development of Jewish settlement and will act to encourage and promote the establishment and consolidation of Jewish settlement. The Hebrew calendar will be the official calendar. Independence Day is a national holiday, as is Holocaust Remembrance Day and Memorial Day. So it's building into the core underpinnings of the state a very clear first class is Jewish and second class is Arab nature, more than has ever been before, and that's quite a move from the Israel of, say, the 60s or 70s.
David, has the nation state bill, nation state law, has that? Because we've been talking about Orthodox having to be brought into the IDF and so on, that causing problems. Is the nation state law universally welcomed amongst Israeli Jews, or are there similar splits appearing in the Jewish communities over that one?
Oh yes, there are major splits, and the split is between, on one hand, you have the religious Zionist and Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, and then on the other hand, you've got secular and the other forms of Judaism, Reform and Conservative. Essentially, that's a schism. Mostly, it's like right left, if it means anything anymore, is only interpreted in terms of the peace process, in terms of the national struggle for safety and what you do with the adult population. It's all to do with that now. So the left-right split aligns along this law as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for that. Now we'll come back home, and we mentioned a couple of days ago that the British government had asked the OPCW to come and investigate the Amesbury so-called Novichok poisoning. Well, the OPCW has announced that it's done that. It said the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons received a request on the 13th of July from the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland for the OPCW to provide technical assistance regarding the incident in Amesbury. In response to the request, the OPCW deployed a technical assistance team to independently determine the nature of the substance that is alleged to have resulted in the death of one person and left another person seriously ill. The OPCW team collected samples. The samples will be sent to 2 OPCW designated laboratories, and once the results of the analysis are received, the report will be submitted to the United Kingdom. The team completed its initial work and returned today. That was yesterday, or sorry, no, that was Wednesday from the UK. The UK's request for assistance was made in accordance with the Chemical Weapons Convention. Well, that's good. So that's all been done. Now, we wait to see what the final results of that are. But in the meantime, the Russians continue to be pretty unhappy with the situation regarding the OPCW and the ability to attribute blame for chemical weapons incidents alleged. So this is the envoy to the OPCW, Alexander Shulgin, who said, that this issue of attribution from the OPCW was adopted by a minority. We've made it clear that we will not execute it and will do everything possible to rectify the situation. If the situation is not fixed, the days of the OPCW are numbered, at least as far as truly universal character is concerned. Any attributive functions of the OPCW delegating the technical secretariat functions of identifying perpetrators behind the use of chemical weapons, it is a direct encroachment of the UN Security Council's prerogative. So the Russians continuing to be pretty upset about that, and David, rightly so, because the OPCW is there to investigate and present evidence. It's not there to act as judge and jury as well.
It's not. And what's the evidence going to be? How safe is the sequence of ownership of that evidence after so long a time?
Well, I mean, that's the point, because the only way the OPCW, or the only thing the OPCW can do here is take a sample and say what that sample is. They were not involved in the collection of that sample, and so they have no way of knowing, other than to take the UK's word for it, that the chain of evidence was maintained. And of course, this is exactly the same situation as we have in Syria, where the alleged chemical weapons incidents, for example, Douma, the samples are received with the OPCW having never visited the scene, never seen the scene for itself, and never collected the samples themselves, and they're relying on third parties, in this case white helmets and other terrorist-related people, to gather that evidence, and no evidence that the chain of evidence has been maintained. So the situation's parallel.
Yes, exactly so. And that wouldn't be acceptable in a minor drugs bust in a court. Why would it be acceptable in the world of international politics, where the potential consequences of it all going horribly wrong are too horrible to contemplate?
Well, we'll just remind everybody that this, of course, is one aspect of Theresa May's rapid response mechanism that was agreed at the G7 a couple of months ago, 6 weeks ago or so, where a common narrative and a common attribution will take place, no matter whether there's any evidence or not. Now, let's move on to Brexit briefly. And yesterday, Dominic Raab, the UK's new Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, went and met Michel Barnier, and I'm sure they had a lovely meeting. But today there's a General Affairs Council meeting being held with the EU 27 and And Michel Barnier will inform the Council, meeting, as I say, in an EU27 format about the talks that he had yesterday. They're going to discuss the state of play of negotiations, focusing on completion of work on withdrawal issues, issues related to the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, discussion on the framework for the future relationship with the UK, and in particular they're going to discuss Theresa May's white paper, which, David, I'm sure you agree with me, is a spectacular piece of writing.
Well, it is. Someone did suggest it was delayed because it took longer than anticipated to translate it from German. I thought that was a little harsh, but quite funny. Yes, she seems to be banking on finding the right brand of fudge, so that there's just enough support to see it through and just enough credibility to not be hounded out of office by an infuriated populace afterwards, as opposed to actually, you know, having a belief in standing by it and arguing for it. That seems to be what we're doing. It's
I think you're being pretty. Sorry, I think you're being pretty generous there, suggesting she would only be hounded out of office at the end of this. I think there's perhaps very much a potential for much worse to occur. Okay, look, let's move on to this. A couple of days ago, we were talking about this report from the all-party parliamentary group on drones, and they had released this report following a 2-year inquiry on the UK's use of drones. And if we remember, they said they were talking about the issue of whether UK personnel were likely to have committed war crimes. They said a correct determination of whether a targeted individual is a fighter within an organised armed group that the UK is involved in an armed conflict with is also important for another reason: the risks related to prosecution of UK personnel. Targeting of civilians in situations of armed conflict constitutes a war crime, which is subject to prosecution domestically and before international courts, including the International Criminal Court. And it went on to say that, if we can, yes, here we go, where strikes are conducted in armed conflict and persons who are civilians are targeted, this may amount to war crime. Also, the risk of prosecution would be present where drone strikes occur outside situations of armed conflict. And went on to say the possibility of criminal prosecution for complicity in murder also arises for all UK personnel who have a role in assisting or facilitating the use of lethal force by coalition allies such as the US, which has a much wider approach to the use of lethal force outside of armed conflict, and so on. So this is what they were saying about drones. Well, today the Ministry of Defence and others have decided, well, we don't need to worry about that because we're not going to have humans in a position to operate these drones for too much longer. So they have announced their intention to absolutely go full flight towards the utopia, shall we call it, of autonomous drones. So they're saying futuristic drones and unmanned ground robots with autonomous delivered order capability could provide timely answers to the vital challenges of access for humanitarian aid and disaster relief. So we're going to couch this up as humanitarian aid and disaster relief, but this isn't about the Department for International Development. This is about a cross-government initiative beginning with the Ministry of Defence. It includes the Department for International Development, and it also includes UK Research and Innovation. So cross-government is being led by the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, not the International Development Science and Technology Laboratory, the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory. So this is the second phase, they say, of a competition which will build prototypes for initial demonstration this year. They're going to offer money to various kinds of people. Who are they talking about here? Animal Dynamics is one of the companies with a system featuring novel autonomous powered paragliders. Okay. But Bernard Microsystems, along with Cranfield University, looking at vertical takeoff and landing unmanned air vehicle based systems. Fleetonomy with Thales and others to provide a system to demonstrate autonomous networked unmanned deliveries in urban and other environments. Deliveries of what? and Kinetic and Hull University are involved in highly automated logistics systems. So okay, there is a mix of stuff here, but at the end of the day, they are developing, David, autonomous drone technology, which of course could be used to develop to deliver a book from Amazon, or it could be used to deliver a bunker buster bomb at the end of the day.
Well, this is it. Yes, there was a discussion there about the use of armed drones killing people outside of armed conflict. How is that a thing? A, surely if you're shooting people, it's kind of an armed conflict. And B, under what circumstances are we using these things outside of an armed conflict? That seemed very strange. Yes, and what is it going to deliver? Well, quite. Not just pizza, I think.
No, ultimately that's the point. Okay, now moving back to Scotland briefly, well, perhaps for our international audience, you should explain what the Orange Order is. The headline here is Jeanette Findlay: "The Orange Order is despicable, but it should have no greater right than others to march."
Yes, right. Okay, explain the Orange Order. Oh dear. Right, the Orange Order is a Protestant working class organisation which has roots in Northern Ireland, in Ulster, and in the religious conflicts of the 17th century, and has a history which extends through from there, and is very popular in West Central Scotland, where there's been a lot of interaction and people moving back and forward between Ulster and Scotland.
It's not unfair to say that it's Masonic in its nature.
There's a fair overlap between the Orange Order and the Masons. Yes, I think that's accurate. It's viewed as being anti-Catholic, which is true to an extent. But it's also an organisation that does education and promotes their view of Christianity and defends their view of their history and heritage. And although it's not an organisation I have any affinity or association with, like many of these things, I think it's a case of condemn what is to be condemned and then find out the rest. So they're having one of the regular orange walks, which residents of Ulster, certain parts of Liverpool and central Scotland will know quite well. There was a minor assault on a Catholic priest by one of the people following the walk. The assault was completely unjustifiable and unpleasant, there is no excuse for such behaviour. But it was greeted with a huge cry, including from politicians and MSPs like James Dorman, to ban the Orange Order, to ban all of the walks, which presumably means using physical force to bar people from free assembly and walking along the street if they so choose. So you then had this second article, which is a very typical. Sorry, not this one, but the one about the Orange Order is disgusting or despicable, but the Jeanette Findlay, right? The Orange Order is despicable, but it should have the right to march. This is a typical kind of left-wing social justice warrior. They have to do the virtue signalling first. They have to say this thing. It's like say Tommy Robinson is a despicable racist, Trump is a misogynist. You always get this, and then they'll go on to say what they're actually wanting to talk about, because they have to do the genuflecting to the political correct speech first. So she then talks about, well, okay, they should be allowed to march. And there's some wiser heads in Scotland which I'd like to finish with are talking about the same thing. But simultaneously, or virtually so, we had a Roman Catholic priest speaking out against the Pride March. Now, this one here, he said that the Pride March was an affront to God, and called for a service to to essentially make amends because of what was done. He asked for a rosary of reparation for the gross offence to God, which is Pride Glasgow, to quote him properly. And of course, for this gross offence of being Roman Catholic, when he was a Roman Catholic priest, he was dismissed from his post. The university principal, Pamela Gillis, said, following due consultation, Father Mark Morris will not return to his chaplaincy role at the University of Glasgow. So there you see, if you're in the Orange Order and you believe what the Orange Order believe, you're going to get banned. If you're Roman Catholic and you believe what Roman Catholics believe, you're going to get banned and possibly lose your job. The message here is you must only think the way that the Scottish government says you should think. Now, one commentator in the Glasgow Herald, who is actually a Roman Catholic himself, Kevin McKenna, said it very well. He said, instead of trying to exploit this crisis in the Orange Order, the Catholic hierarchy should be reaching out to them to seek an accommodation regarding a number of marches and some of the traditional routes. When the big push comes to outlaw all unacceptable symbols of Christianity in Scotland, these two will be the last defenders. We should both get to know each other a little better. You know, I think that might be true.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there for today because we're right out of time. David, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for joining us. We will be back as usual at 1 p.m. on Monday. Have a good weekend in the meantime, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.